What if true love were merely an invention, a myth created to sustain our deepest inadequacies? Nietzsche believed that love, so celebrated as the pinnacle of union between two souls, concealed an uncomfortable truth. It doesn't spring from wholeness, but from emptiness. To love, according to the philosopher, is almost never to give oneself freely, but to seek in the other what completes us, what we believe we lack. It's a game of mirrors, where we see more the reflection of our own needs than the reality of the beloved person. When we speak of true love, we talk about absolute surrender, fusion, eternity. But how do we reconcile this with human imperfection, with desire that never satisfies itself, and with the constant urge to dominate, possess, and be recognized? Could it be possible that the love we idealize is precisely the one that will never exist? Nietzsche didn't write to offer comfort, but to tear apart illusions. His reflection on love places us before a choice: continue believing in a fairy tale or face the harshness of our own nature. Are you prepared to question the truth about love? If this journey resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and follow along with us. Nietzsche looked at love with suspicion. Not that romantic gaze that celebrates the purity of feelings, but a clinical look, almost surgical, capable of seeing behind the veils. He believed that under love's mask, darker desires frequently hide: the urge to dominate, the need to possess, the impulse to transform the other into an extension of oneself. Loving for Nietzsche is almost never genuine surrender. It's a game of forces, a silent dispute, where each person seeks, even unconsciously, to mold the other to their own measure. When two lovers say, "I love you," the phrase sounds like a promise of surrender and union, but in essence, it also contains something of appropriation. My love isn't just a declaration of affection, but a mark of possession, as if the other were conquered territory, an object upon which we project our wills. That's why Nietzsche was so suspicious of the idea of true love. For him, the purity of this feeling is illusory, because it's always contaminated by the will to power. Think of an everyday relationship. At first glance, there's affection, care, companionship, but if we look deeper, we'll also see demands, expectations, and requirements. If you love me, you need to act like this. If you really care, you should choose me. These phrases reveal that love, instead of being pure acceptance, often becomes an attempt to control. The other stops being a free and autonomous being to become a prisoner of our emotional needs. Nietzsche didn't deny that love brings pleasure, intensity, even moments of transcendence. What he questioned was the myth of its innocence. Loving isn't a neutral experience, but a battlefield where hidden desires fight for space. The idea that two souls unite in perfect harmony was for him a dangerous illusion, because it masks the struggle of forces that exists in every human relationship. Imagine someone who claims to love but wants the other to change their way of being, their habits, their friendships. Is this still love or just the will to possess? For Nietzsche, this question dismantles the romantic ideal, because deep down, almost every love wants to mold, wants to transform, wants to domesticate. Few loves are capable of accepting the radical difference of the other without trying to frame them. This vision may seem harsh, even cynical, but Nietzsche didn't write to console us, but to awaken us. He believed that only by facing love as it is, an expression of the will to power, can we free ourselves from illusion. After all, when we believe in true love as pure and eternal surrender, we're destined for frustration. Sooner or later, we'll discover that human love is imperfect, unstable, and full of contradictions. This imperfection, for Nietzsche, isn't a defect, but life's very nature. Love doesn't need to be denied, but understood in its real essence. By seeing it as a mask of power, we begin to view our relationships with more lucidity. We discover that we often seek in the other not just affection, but also validation, security, status, recognition. We discover that loving isn't just feeling, but also wanting, disputing, influencing. Nietzsche provoked, do we really love the other, or do we love what the other awakens in us? The answer is often uncomfortable, because love, in practice, comes closer to an exchange of forces than to an angelic fusion. To love is also to want to be loved, to be chosen, to be confirmed. And this desire already carries within itself the seed of possession. The myth of true love, therefore, dissolves. What remains is a human feeling, all too human, crossed by interests, drives, and wills. Far from being a condemnation, this realization is an invitation to freedom. Because by recognizing the dimension of power in love, we stop being prisoners of illusions. We can begin to love more consciously, knowing that there will always be tensions, but choosing not to hide them under masks. Nietzsche challenges us to look at love without idealizations. This doesn't mean denying its beauty, but abandoning naivety. Love can be intense, overwhelming, transformative, but it's never pure. It's made of flesh, desire, ego, fear, and power. And perhaps it's precisely this imperfect mixture that makes it so human and so irresistible. Deep down, Nietzsche didn't want to destroy love, but to free it from the lie of the true. Because only when we accept that all love carries a bit of domination and possession, can we begin to love without illusions. And perhaps it's at this point, paradoxically, that love becomes more authentic, when we stop believing it's perfect. If at first glance Nietzsche already unmasks love as a game of forces, in this second step his analysis deepens by revealing how the very idea of romantic love springs from a carefully cultivated illusion. For him, romanticism wasn't just an artistic or literary movement, but also a poison that contaminated our vision of relationships. Romanticism taught us to believe that there exists a soulmate, a written destiny, a perfect fusion between two beings who complete each other. It's the promise of absolute unity, the conviction that true love can save us from existence's emptiness. But Nietzsche, with his relentless gaze, saw there a trap. According to the philosopher, human nature isn't made of fullness, but of lack and movement. We desire because something is missing from us. We love because we feel absence. We search because we can't bear emptiness. Romanticism, by idealizing perfect union, masks this fundamental condition. It promises a completeness that never materializes. To love, under the romantic perspective, is to believe that the other will fill our flaws, heal our wounds, give meaning to our life. But no person, however special they may be, can carry on their shoulders the task of saving someone's existence. Here enters Nietzsche's central notion, the will to power. Every living being, in its essence, seeks to expand itself, assert itself, conquer. Love, contrary to what we think, isn't exempt from this impulse. When we love, we don't set aside the will to power. On the contrary, it manifests in an even more subtle way. We desire the other not just for who they are, but for what they awaken in us: security, pleasure, recognition, illusory completeness. Romanticism calls this surrender. Nietzsche calls it appropriation. Think about how many relationships begin under the promise of eternity. You are everything to me. Without you, I am nothing. These phrases, which seem like declarations of deep love, actually reveal dependence. The other isn't loved as they are, but as a function, the function of filling the void, sustaining self-esteem, giving meaning to existence. This is the romantic illusion. It doesn't show us the other in their freedom, but transforms them into an instrument of our need. Nietzsche questioned, is it possible to love someone without transforming them into a means for realizing our own desires? Romanticism would say yes, that love is altruistic, that it gives without asking anything in return. But the philosopher saw in this discourse yet another trap. because even the idea of total surrender carries the will to power. Surrendering oneself can be, paradoxically, a way of dominating, of generating guilt in the other, of demanding recognition through sacrifice. Loving, then, is never neutral. It's always crossed by forces, intentions, strategies, even if unconscious. That's why Nietzsche rejected the notion of true love. For him, what's true in love is precisely the struggle that hides behind the appearance of harmony. The romantic illusion creates impossible expectations. It wants love to be eternal, pure, absolute. But the human is impermanent, contradictory, full of multiple desires. Sooner or later, the fantasy crumbles, and what remains is frustration. How many couples don't suffer precisely because they believe too much in the romantic ideal, demanding from the other an impossible perfection? This criticism doesn't mean Nietzsche was against love. What he fought was the lie of romantic love. He saw in this a form of slavery, an emotional prison that prevents us from facing life with honesty. When we believe in the soulmate, in perfect fusion, in eternal love, we become hostages to unreal expectations. Love, then, instead of freeing us, imprisons us. By seeing love as an expression of the will to power, Nietzsche invites us to a radical change of perspective. It's not about abandoning love, but demystifying it. Loving isn't finding the lost half, but dealing with another equally imperfect human being, full of contradictions and their own desires. It's accepting that the relationship won't be fusion, but tension. It won't be eternity, but flow. It won't be fullness, but movement. The romantic illusion promises peace. Nietzsche reminds us that love, like everything in life, is struggle. And perhaps it's precisely this struggle that makes it so intense. When we recognize the will to power in our relationships, we stop expecting perfection and start seeking authenticity. We love not to complete ourselves, but to share the experience of existing, even if imperfect, even if temporary. Thus, love stops being an unreachable dream and transforms into something more human, more real, more courageous. And perhaps by abandoning the romantic illusion, we can finally love more freely. Nietzsche had an almost cruel ability to unmask human illusions. If it was already difficult to accept that love could be a form of power and a romantic illusory construction, even more disturbing is his idea that most of the time, what we call love is nothing more than a refined form of narcissism. To love, he said, often means loving oneself through the other. It's using the figure of the beloved person as a mirror that returns what we want to see in ourselves. In romantic discourse, we say, "I love you for who you are." But in practice, we almost always love because the other makes us feel a certain way. We love because they make us feel desired, admired, special. We love because their presence reinforces the image we want to build of ourselves. If the other challenges us, rejects us, or doesn't correspond to our idealizations, love quickly transforms into hurt, resentment, or indifference. This reveals that in many cases we don't love the other in their singularity, but what they mean for our ego. Nietzsche saw in this movement a sophisticated form of selfishness, not vulgar selfishness of someone who only thinks of themselves, but disguised selfishness, adorned with flowers and poetry. The other is transformed into a stage where we enact our desires for greatness. Love becomes thus a theater. We say we're concerned with the other, but what we really seek is to confirm our own importance. The beloved becomes mirror, reflection, confirmation. And the more they return to us a positive image, the more we say we love them. We can perceive this in everyday examples. How many times does someone fall in love not with the other themselves, but with the way that other makes them feel? The person might say, "I love the way you look at me, how you make me laugh, how you understand me." Note that in all cases the focus isn't on the other, but on the effect they provoke. Love, thus, reveals itself as an indirect relationship with oneself. We love what the other awakens in us, not necessarily who they are. Nietzsche didn't deny that genuine admiration or care might exist, but affirmed that even in these cases, there's a layer of narcissism. After all, loving someone we admire is also reinforcing our own identity. Being beside them ennobles us, elevates us, gives us status, makes us feel part of something greater. Love, then, is never totally about the other. There's always a component that returns to the self. This diagnosis may seem disenchanting, but brings with it a liberating truth. Because when we believe in the idea of true love as forgetting oneself, we inevitably fall into frustration. We expect an impossible purity. Recognizing love's narcissistic element is accepting that it's part of the human condition. It doesn't mean love is false, but that it's more complex than we like to admit. Nietzsche said that man can't bear to live without mirrors. We always seek something that reflects us, that confirms our existence, and love is the most intense mirror of all. It's in love that we project our hopes, our fears, our will to be meaningful. The problem arises when we confuse this reflection with reality, when we believe we love the other, but actually love only our image in them. At this point, love becomes prison because the other stops being free. They come to exist to sustain our ego. That's why so many relationships enter crisis when the mirror breaks. When the other no longer returns what we want to see, the enchantment dissolves. Suddenly, we realize we weren't loving the real person, but the image they reflected of us. And this realization can be devastating. Nietzsche, however, didn't see this as a reason to give up on love. On the contrary, he saw it as an opportunity to live more honest relationships. Loving without illusions means admitting the narcissistic component, but also learning to go beyond it. It means recognizing that although we inevitably seek something in ourselves through the other, we can also open space to accept their otherness, their difference, their freedom. This is the challenge, to love without transforming the other merely into a mirror. Perhaps it's here that the true Nietzschean teaching hides. It's not about denying love's narcissism, but facing it. Understanding that although there's always a search for oneself, love can also be an exercise of expansion, openness, acceptance of the different. But this requires courage to see the other not as reflection, but as mystery that never reduces to our ego. Deep down, Nietzsche provokes us with a cruel question. Do we ever actually love someone? Or do we always love only versions of ourselves projected onto the other's body? This question, although uncomfortable, is also liberating. Because only when we dare to answer it with sincerity can we begin to love in a less illusory and truer way. If Nietzsche had already dismantled love as power and as narcissism, now he leads us to an even deeper point. Love springs from lack. We love because we feel absence, because we desire, because we can't bear the incompleteness of existing alone. And precisely because it springs from lack, love cannot be absolute or definitive. It's always unstable, fragile, conditioned to the incessant movement of desire. Romanticism taught us to believe that love fulfills. I found my lost half. Now I am complete. But for Nietzsche, these phrases reveal dangerous naivety. If love springs from desire, and if desire is by definition insatiable, then there will never be completeness. What today seems fullness soon wears away, because desire, like fire, always requires more fuel. It feeds on absence, not on possession. When we finally conquer what we wanted, desire weakens, and we again seek something new. It's possible to perceive this in the common experience of many relationships. The beginning is marked by intensity, excitement, the sensation that everything is new. But with time, desire settles and the flame dies out. Then arise demands, dissatisfactions, frustrations, not because love has ended, but because desire has transformed. It never finds rest. It always moves towards something that's lacking. Nietzsche reminds us that life itself is desire. We are beings of lack. We want to eat because we feel hunger. We want to rest because we feel tiredness. We want company because we feel loneliness. Love, in this sense, is just another expression of this logic. It's no different from other needs, just more complex and intense. But just as hunger never disappears once and for all, also amorous desire never resolves definitively. This dismantles the idea of true love as eternal fullness. Because fullness is precisely what desire doesn't know. When we feel complete, desire sleeps. But living without desiring would be living without pulsing, without expanding, without moving. Therefore, life condemns us to incessant search. And love, far from being salvation, is the most beautiful and most painful expression of this condemnation. Nietzsche saw in this not a reason to despair, but to mature. While we believe that love can be fullness, we'll be trapped in frustration. We'll expect from the other what no human being can give us, the cure for the essential lack that constitutes our existence. The other can accompany us, can inspire us, can even alleviate our pains, but cannot eliminate the lack that inhabits us. This lack isn't a defect, but a condition. It's what moves us, what impels us, what makes us create, dream, and love. The problem arises when we confuse this condition with a promise of final realization. Love, then, transforms into prison because we demand from the other the impossible, that they make us whole. And when they fail, we feel betrayed, as if they had stolen something from us. But actually, the error was in the initial illusion. Nietzsche invites us to look at love directly, without veils. To love is to desire, and to desire is never to be complete. If we accept this, we can live love more freely, without demanding that it be eternal, without charging that it be absolute. We can see the other as journey companion, not as savior. And perhaps this imperfect love, because human, is truer than the impossible ideal of romanticism. Think about how many times you've already believed that this time will be different, that you finally found someone capable of satisfying your search. At the beginning, the sensation seems to confirm it. There's euphoria, there's intensity, there's fire. But soon, reality returns, reminding that no human being is capable of being everything. This cycle isn't personal failure, but universal condition. It's the natural movement of desire. Nietzsche didn't ask that we abandon love, but that we free it from the lie of fullness. By recognizing its root in desire and lack, we learn not to idealize it, and paradoxically, this makes it more authentic. Because we love not to be complete, but to live the experience of encounter, even if temporary, even if unstable. Love, seen thus, stops being a promise of eternity and becomes a dance of moments. A flame that lights up, goes out, and can light up again, in other forms. We don't need to demand that it last forever, because its beauty lies precisely in being fleeting. Like the sunset, like music that ends, like life that passes. It's in this recognition that Nietzsche sees the possibility of liberation, loving without demanding fullness, loving knowing that something will always be missing, loving not as salvation, but as experience of power, intensity, and creation. Perhaps this is what remains when we leave behind the myth of true love, the courage to live love as it is, incomplete, imperfect, but still deeply human. If romantic love is an illusion, if desire condemns us to lack, if narcissism contaminates our bonds, then what remains? For Nietzsche, the answer isn't in denying love, but in overcoming it in its illusory form. He proposes something radical, creating new values for love. Because every moral, every belief, every ideal, he said, is a human invention. And if we were capable of inventing the myth of true love, we can also be capable of destroying it and replacing it with something more honest, more free, more vital. Nietzsche's criticism wasn't an invitation to cynicism or cold detachment. On the contrary, it was a provocation for us to stop living on inherited illusions. Romantic love, with its promise of fusion and eternity, is an inherited value, a cultural invention that imprisons. We need, therefore, a transvaluation, a reinterpretation process in which we question what was imposed on us and dare to create new ways of living. What would be, then, a love beyond the romantic? Nietzsche suggests a path, a love that recognizes struggle, that accepts desire, that doesn't demand fullness, a love that doesn't hide behind masks of purity, but assumes its ambiguous nature. This love doesn't promise eternity, but intensity. It doesn't seek fusion, but expansion. It doesn't imprison, but strengthens. Think about the difference between loving expecting the other to complete us and loving recognizing that we are two free beings who meet. In the first case, we transform the other into a function of our needs. In the second, we let the other exist in their own singularity without demanding they be everything to us. This type of love isn't less profound, but more realistic. It doesn't sustain itself on impossible promises, but on conscious choices. Nietzsche believed that human beings need to learn to love without illusions, the same way they need to learn to live without gods. The death of God in his philosophy didn't mean despair, but liberation, the chance to create new values for existence. The same applies to love. The death of true love isn't the end of passion, but the opportunity to reinvent it without chains, without myths that bind us. This requires courage. Because abandoning the idea of eternal love is also abandoning one of the greatest sources of psychological security we possess. It means accepting instability, uncertainty, impermanence. But Nietzsche insisted, it's precisely in accepting impermanence that we find the strength to live fully, loving knowing it can end, loving without guarantee, loving without demanding completeness. This is living with Dionysiac courage, celebrating life in all its instability. In our relationships, this could mean something simple but revolutionary. Not demanding from the other what they cannot give, not charging eternity, not demanding perfection, not transforming the relationship into prison, but choosing each day to remain, choosing to love, even knowing it's not forever, even knowing that desire transforms. This conscious choice, repeated freely, can be more powerful than any romantic promise of eternity. Nietzsche invites us to think of love as creation, creating new forms of relating, more honest, more open, more vital. There's no ready model, no universal formula. Each relationship can be an experiment, a work of art under construction. Loving, then, stops being submission to an imposed ideal and becomes expression of freedom. Of course, this vision is uncomfortable because romantic love, with all its illusion, also offers us comfort. It makes us believe there's security, there's destiny, there's someone perfect waiting for us. Giving this up means facing solitude head-on. But Nietzsche believed that only those who face solitude can truly love, because only those who don't need the other to complete themselves are capable of loving without imprisoning. This new love that Nietzsche invites us to imagine isn't love without desire, but desire without lies. It isn't love without ego, but ego conscious of itself. It isn't love without pain, but pain assumed as part of life. It doesn't promise eternal happiness, but promises intensity and authenticity, and perhaps this is exactly what we need, to free love from the tyranny of the ideal and transform it into a space of creation. Because loving, deep down, is also an artistic act, not reproducing an inherited model, but daring to invent new forms of living together. Love, seen thus, stops being prison and becomes power. After dismantling the idea of true love, Nietzsche leads us to what may be the most difficult lesson. It's not about abandoning love, but learning to love without illusions. This is true freedom, loving without the weight of impossible promises, without the burden of eternity, without the lie of fullness, loving lucidly, accepting desire, lack, power, and even narcissism, but without leaving them hidden under romantic veils. What would be then loving without illusions? It's looking at the other and recognizing them as an imperfect human being, full of contradictions, who won't be able to save us or complete us. It's accepting that every relationship has limits, that every desire is unstable, that every bond is temporary. This acceptance doesn't weaken love. On the contrary, it makes it stronger because it removes from it the impossible burden of expectations. We don't demand that it be eternal to value it. We don't need it to be perfect to celebrate it. Nietzsche saw in this type of love a form of life affirmation, because life itself is imperfect, unstable, transitory. When we love without illusions, we're not fighting against reality, but dancing with it. It's like looking at a sunset, knowing it will soon darken, but instead of lamenting, enjoying each color, each instant. Loving without illusions is living love like someone who lives life, knowing it's finite, but still worthy of intensity. In everyday relationships, this translates into a different posture. Instead of asking, "Will it be forever?" we can ask, "Are we choosing this now?" Instead of demanding that the other complete us, we can ask, "Are we growing together?" This perspective shift transforms love into an exercise of freedom. It's not prison, but conscious choice, repeated while it makes sense. Nietzsche believed that love's greatest slavery isn't in jealousy, fights, or passions, but in inherited illusions. Believing in soulmates, in eternal love, in completeness, this imprisons us because it makes us expect the impossible. Freeing ourselves from these illusions is also freeing our own heart. It's being able to love without fear that it will end, because we know that even the end is part of the game. This freedom isn't cold or distant. On the contrary, it can generate even more intense loves, because they're not suffocated by unreal demands. Loving without illusions is being able to surrender without reserves, precisely because there's no promise of eternity. It's living each instant as unique, without trying to transform it into something eternal. This surrender, paradoxically, can be deeper than any romantic ideal. Nietzsche, when speaking of life, used the idea of eternal return, living in such a way that we could desire to relive each instant infinitely. Perhaps this idea can also be applied to love without illusions. Loving like someone who accepts that everything can end, but still living each moment in such a way that if we had to repeat it eternally, we wouldn't regret it. This is the courage he invites us to cultivate. Deep down, loving without illusions is accepting that there's no true love, but only possible loves. Some will be intense and brief, others lasting and serene, others conflicted and transformative. There's no formula. There's no unique essence. There are only human encounters, always imperfect, always marked by desire, power, and lack, but still encounters capable of giving meaning to life. Nietzsche provokes us. What's more honest? Loving believing in a comforting lie, or loving facing the truth, even if painful? The answer depends on each person's courage, but for him, true freedom only springs when we dare to let the masks fall. Loving without illusions is risky, because it exposes us to the end, to instability, to loss. But it's also more authentic, because it doesn't rely on deceptions. Perhaps it's at this point that love, paradoxically, becomes truer, when we stop believing in true love. Because only without illusions can we see the other as they are, and not as we would like them to be. Only without illusions can we love creatively, choosing consciously, without repeating inherited models. Only without illusions can we love freely. And loving freely, for Nietzsche, is loving in a more human, more Dionysiac, more vital way. Not because it's perfect, but because it accepts imperfection as part of the game. Loving thus isn't escaping reality, but affirming it with all its intensity. And perhaps it's right there that we find not love's perfection, but its deepest strength. The freedom to live without veils, to feel without impossible promises, to love without illusions. We reach the end of this journey through Nietzsche's vision of love. Along the path, we've seen how he unmasks our illusions. Love as a mask of power, as reflection of narcissism, as always unsatisfied desire. He showed that the myth of true love is an impossible promise, a construction that imprisons us more than it frees us. But we've also seen that by abandoning this illusion, we don't lose love. On the contrary, we gain the chance to live it more authentically. Loving without illusions doesn't mean loving less, but loving more freely, consciously, and intensely. It's choosing the other without transforming them into savior. It's accepting desire without demanding fullness. It's embracing impermanence without stopping surrendering. Nietzsche doesn't destroy love, he frees it. And by doing this, he invites us to a profound personal transformation. Stop expecting perfection and start living the beauty of imperfection. And you, what belief about love has imprisoned you most until today? Leave your comment saying where you're watching from. If this reflection moved you, like this video, subscribe to the channel and share this journey. Thank you for being part of this philosophical community that seeks to see life without veils.